Greetings, everyone. It's your boy Gleekon here with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we continued the Dawn of the Aspects first part, where Malygos, the new sort of aspect of the Blue Dragon flight, has been having these weird flashbacks based on this multi-hued artifact he found in the bones of Galakrond, and he's basically seen the proto-drake forms of the other, well, of 4 of the 5, maybe all 5 dragon aspects. And he's seen the father of dragons, Galakrond himself, roaring and being OP, but they're like primitive caveman dragon, basically. Stay a while and listen to chapter 4 of this one. It's called Unlikely Allies, and let's see. Azeroth had suffered many terrible times and menaces. The demons of the Burning Legion and the Sundering, but 2 of the most devastating. Yet to the dragons, to many inhabitants of the world, there had been no greater peril than the mad aspect. From the War of the Ancients 10,000 years ago to recent times, he who had once been the Earth Warder had sought the destruction of all things. Deathwing was gone now and at tremendous sacrifice, but Kalak, still able to watch Neltharion flying into the clouds through Malygos' gaze, wondered how Azeroth would have fared if Deathwing had never been. "Follow him," he urged Malygos to no avail. "Follow him and end the horror before it begins." His host did nothing. Malygos lost interest not only in Neltharion, but also in all else going on around him. Without a word to Alexstrasza or Ysera, he leapt into the air and headed to the north. A few proto-dragons nearby hissed at Malygos as he passed, but the icy blue male ignored them. He had eaten his fill and only wanted to curl up in his remote cavern for a long, pleasant nap while he digested his meal. That Kalak had no desire to do the same was, as usual, lost upon the proto-dragon. But suddenly something hard collided with Malygos from behind. He rolled in the sky, then began to plummet. As he struggled to regain control, both he and Kalak caught a glimpse of the cause of their troubles. Koros and another male of the same hue dived down to attack. Malygos managed to slow his descent, but could still not right himself. Koros and his comrade hissed eagerly as they neared. Malygos opened his mouth. A shower of icicles shot forth. Koros evaded them, but the other proto-dragon did not entirely avoid being struck. The icicles slashed through one wing. But once more, Malygos was hit from behind as a third foe entered the fray. Kalak helplessly watching guessed that Koros had set up this attack before Galakrond's appearance. From Malygos' jumbled thoughts, Kalak picked up bits of a long rivalry over territory, prey, and who was more cunning. At the moment, it seemed that Koros had the advantage in the last. Koros exhaled, and what appeared to be a web of smoke enveloped Malygos. The icy blue male fought for breath as the smoke sealed off his nostrils and mouth. Despite his wounds, the first of Koros' companions re-entered the struggle. With an eager expression, the proto-dragon opened wide as he sought Malygos' throat. Thunder roiled, or rather a sound like thunder. Malygos' wounded attacker dropped as if hit by 1,000 dwarven hammers. A hearty laugh followed the jarring sound. Kalak saw a gray blur cross Malygos' path, then collide with Koros. "You want to fight? Fight me!" cried Neltharion as he grappled with Malygos' rival. This was a foe that Koros could not have counted on, but he did not back down. He opened wide, and Neltharion slammed the blue-green's jaw up, closing the mouth at a critical moment. Koros jerked away from his opponent. The blue-green male clawed at his mouth, ripping away scale and skin until he managed to open it again. Neltharion's act had managed to turn the other proto-dragon's breath weapon against him in a manner that both Malygos and Kalak admired. However, the Grey's amusement at his success left him open to the third of the attackers. The remaining blue-green landed atop Neltharion, wrapping his hind paws around the Grey's throat. At the same time, he sought to bite through one of Neltharion's wings. But in the next second, the Grey's foe was torn free of his prey by Malygos, who had finally had the opportunity to recover. Malygos ripped at the other proto-dragon's wings and neck, scoring 2 strong strikes. Blood splattered his muzzle as he tore into his target. A wildly flapping wing hit Malygos hard in the face. It startled him enough to make him loosen his grip. His adversary used that moment to pull free. Rather than turn to fight, the wounded Leviathan retreated as swiftly as he could. Another of the attackers soared past Malygos. Only belatedly did Kalak and his host note that that fleeing figure as Koros. Of the final member of the treacherous trio, there was no sign.
Too short, cowards! Come, fight again!
Neltharion roared after the two diminished figures. Despite their clear victory, Malygos radiated no interest in wreaking further damage on his old rival. He watched silently as the Grey continued to berate the losers until they were out of sight. Finally losing interest, Neltharion spun to face Malygos.
You fight good. Not as good as Galakrond, not as good as me, but good.
Malygos nodded.
You fight very good. Malygos thanks you.
The attempted gratitude received a hearty laugh.
No, thank you. It was a good fight.
Malygos did not shrink from a battle, but unlike Neltharion, did not savor it. Within, Kalik remained torn between being relieved that Neltharion had come to their aid and feeling anxious that the future Deathwing hovered before them.
A good fight, yes,
the icy blue proto-dragon finally agreed.
We are brothers in blood,
Neltharion continued, shifting closer.
Both smarter than the others, too.
The other proto-dragon did not disagree. For all his bluster, Neltharion was clever. Malygos' interest turned to another astonishing subject stirred up by a chance mention from the Grey.
Galakrond, he never hunts here. Why now? You know? Ha! Galakrond hunts where Galakrond wishes.
Yet after saying that, Neltharion paused. After visible consideration, he added,
More food. Yes, more food here.
More food, Malygos agreed. A horrifying thought occurred to the proto-dragon.
Our food.
Neltharion understood immediately.
Our food. Not good. No, not...
Something on one of the nearby hills to Malygos' right caught the proto-dragon's attention. Malygos immediately glanced that way, enabling Kalik to also look.
They come back?
The Grey eagerly asked, referring to Koros and the other two.
No.
Malygos remained distracted by whatever he had noticed, but his thoughts remained murky to Kalik. Malygos suddenly arced toward those hills, a curious Neltharion accompanying him. They arrived but scant seconds later, whereupon Malygos began to survey the vicinity.
Nothing here,
Neltharion concluded long before his companion was satisfied.
No enemy to fight. Shame.
No enemy, Malygos reluctantly agreed. Again, the future aspect noticed something at the edge of his vision. This time he reacted even more quickly.
Something?
The Grey asked with rising interest. Malygos squinted. Kalik saw nothing through his host, but felt Malygos tense as if he did. So powerful a sensitivity. The words were not Kalik's, nor were they Malygos' thoughts. Despite being well aware by now that he had no true voice, Kalik could not hold back a gasp of discovery. To him, part of the landscape moved. A ripple little bigger than a tall human. It moved only a short distance to the side and did so slowly, almost as if seeing what would happen. To the eyes of most, it would have been unnoticeable, and Neltharion was evidence of that. He snorted and peered elsewhere while he patiently waited for Malygos to finish.
Look there.
Look there, Malygos demanded fruitlessly, yet it became clear to him that Malygos did not quite see what he did. Malygos finally gave up, turning back to Neltharion. In that one instant, Kalik, not his host, saw what watched. And as he did, the world spun madly. Kalik became lost in a black maelstrom. He had nothing upon which to grab hold, either physically or mentally. The blue sank into a dark, endless hole. Only to wake up on the floor of his sanctum, his still contorted part dragon, half elven body, awash in sweat. Groaning, Kalik dragged himself toward a nearby wall. As he approached, a small shimmering fountain of silver water rose from thin air. It directed itself toward the slowly transforming dragon, who opened his stretching muzzle wide and swallowed the cool, refreshing contents. As the magical liquid coursed through him, Kalik's mind began to reorganize itself. His first thought was not about what he had seen in that last moment, but about the true bane of his existence. Managing to rise, the blue dragon returned to the secret place where he had put the artifact. Not at all to his surprise, it glowed as he had first noticed in the wastes. The glow faded immediately, but Kalik was not fooled. The artifact was active, and had probably been active from the moment that he had sensed its existence. Kalik no longer cared for what purpose it had been designed. He wanted nothing more than to either destroy it or cast it far, far away. Well aware of the potential for disaster when dealing with any magical object, Kalik chose the latter course. He pictured a place obscure to most and used a spell to send the accursed artifact there. An immense wave of relief came over him. Kalik slumped back, grateful for the peace of the moment. Without meaning to, his attention returned to the essence of the visions. Malygos, Alexstrasza, Ysera, and Neltharion, 4 of those who would change Azeroth forever as its guiding aspects. Kalik assumed that somewhere in those visions a young Nosdormu had also appeared. The analytical part of Kalik wondered what the visions meant. The emotional part wanted nothing to do with them. Each vision burned deeper into the Blue's mind. Kalik feared that if they had progressed, the visions would have eventually stolen his mind. He returned to the magical fountain, a creation of his own that now proved highly beneficial. At last satiated, Kalik forced the visions from his thoughts. He had more important, more immediate concerns. A thing of horror rose before him, a cadaverous dragon with sunken white eyes and shriveled flesh. Rotting tongue dangling to the side, it lunged for Kalik and vanished. Kalik shivered. His heart beat wildly. The stench of decay still lingered in his nostrils, even though it slowly dawned on him that what he had seen had not actually stood before him, but rather had been a product of his imagination. It took much to unnerve one of his kind, even for a moment, but this horrific sight had certainly done so. Kalik could still not shake the sense that he had smelled the apparition, although that was impossible. As Kalik's calm returned, his first thought involved the artifact, but it was hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Kalik could not believe that it could affect him from so far. Still, the more he recalled glimpses of the macabre illusion, the more details that hinted of the artifact's connection came to light. This had been no dragon, but a proto-dragon whose size had been shaped by Kalik's own mind, and the Blue had not even thought about proto-dragons until finding the accursed thing under Galakron's frozen bones. Galakron. Voices arose all around Kalik, but he knew immediately that they came from within, not without.
This thing is dead. This thing cannot fight.
Kalik roared, his cry echoing through his sanctum. The roar did nothing to drown out the ever-increasing voices. The dragon desperately spun around, his tail crashing against a wall with such force that it cracked the rock.
I will not listen. I will not succumb. So many dead. We cannot fight. It must be done no matter the sacrifice.
The last voice cut through the rest. With it came another manifestation in Kalik's mind, one so real that yet again he thought it stood before him. The hooded, robed figure. The phantasm vanished back into the darkness within. Kalik remained utterly still, afraid that if he even moved, the entire madness would begin again. When it did not, he took a long breath and thought hard. He could think of only one recourse. He would have to seek out Alexstrasza again. For most, the task of finding her, the one who had once been the Lifebinder, would have proved daunting. Alexstrasza stayed in no place for very long, perhaps because if she did, she might dwell too much on what had been lost. Kalik understood that she had come to grips with the fact that the dragons as a race were no longer viable, that the last eggs had hatched, and from here there would only be fewer and fewer dragons as time and circumstance took their toll. Yet perhaps through some lingering link from their roles as aspects, or simply because he understood her more than he realized, Kalik located her after only a few false trails. He flew low over the forested land, finally transforming to his humanoid form a good distance from his goal. He did the last not because he sought to surprise her, but rather so as not to frighten the inhabitants of the human village he had seen at the distance. The giggles of children reached him before he found her. Kalik saw the 4 youngsters playing among the trees just beyond the village's boundaries. The game of hide-and-seek seemed to be a fluid one, for the seeker appeared to change from one moment to the next. A man's voice called the children back into the village. There was always the danger of wolves or other threats, although this land appeared fairly peaceful in comparison to many in the changed world. Moreover, considering the 2 figures now nearby, the children in their village were for a short time safe from almost anything.
They seem very happy,
Kalik commented. A part of the tree was left separated. The facade of bark faded, revealing a beautiful fiery-tressed woman, dressed in form-fitting gold and crimson armor. She loomed over Kalik and appeared to be from some far more glorious and mysterious elven branch. A regal crimson cloak flowed behind her as she joined him.
They are so young, she murmured, her brilliant red eyes somber. They have such vitality. I see why Coilstraws enjoyed their particular kind so much.
Is that Krasis? And is she speaking of Krasis in the past tense as well? Bummer. Kalik briefly bowed his head in memory of perhaps the most legendary of Alexstrasza's consorts, even though his own relationship with Coilstraws who had also worked among the younger races as the mage Krasis, had been tempestuous at times, to say the least. They had come to an understanding well before the Red Male's death, but Kalik felt some guilt about the past schism whenever Alexstrasza brought up her beloved mate. Another spoiler.
Humans hold much hope, but they do also hold much threat,
He could not help finally responding.
The Lich King was once human. And many of those who fought him hardest were human too.
She returned her gaze to the village.
Was there something you wanted?
He suddenly felt so very young, almost as young as the children they had been watching.
I wanted to ask some things of you when we gathered at Wormrest, but the gathering ended so quickly, so abruptly.
Alexstrasza looked back.
I am so very sorry. We did not treat you with the respect we should have. The moment just overtook the rest of us. It is not an excuse. We were remiss. I am aware that you three share something I can barely fathom. I am still honored that I was chosen, even if for a short time.
Kalik exhaled sharply.
Alexstrasza, after the three of you left Wormrest, I found an artifact of unsettling nature. I need your guidance. Guidance?
For the first time she did not look pleased with his presence.
My advice will avail you little, Kalik. I would think that you, being a blue, would certainly be better at deciphering some artifact's design and purpose than I. In fact,
the children ran into sight again. Although they remained within the confines of the village, their playing was still visible enough to draw Alexstrasza's attention. She clapped her hands together in delight as a small girl paused in her play to hug what was likely her slightly older brother. Kalik started to talk, then noticed how strained her smile actually was. He envisioned all the lost lives, especially those young like these children, and how they had affected the former aspect inside. Alexstrasza herself had suffered more than most. Not only had all her eggs been destroyed by Coriolstraz in the act of sacrificing himself to prevent their corruption into monstrous twilight dragons, and her ability to lay more been forever taken away, but in addition to all that, she lived with the knowledge that the other dragonflights had also suffered so. She might have accepted her loss of power, but not this loss of her kind's future. After all, she had been the life-binder. Stepping back, Kalik left Alexstrasza to her viewing. He could not bring himself to pursue matters with her. In silence, he strode deeper into the forest, waiting only until he was far enough not to frighten the humans before transforming into his true form and flying off. Twice now his hopes of understanding and guidance from one of the elder dragons had ended in futility. Alexstrasza had even intentionally pulled away from him when he had mentioned the mysterious find. True, as a blue, he was still more in tune with all facets of magic, but her experience might have proven invaluable. They have withdrawn from the world, he realized. They have accepted their loss of power, as have I, but now they no longer see themselves as part of Azeroth's future. Kalik could only imagine how Alexstrasza and the others with so many millennia of burdens upon them felt. Dead, it is dead, it should not fight. Another, beware, another. Intense vertigo once again overtook Kalik. The blue dragon tumbled forward, dropping hard as he did. He crashed into several treetops before being able to right himself. The voices receded. Kalik, exhausted by the struggle, landed hard, then blacked out. He awoke what seemed barely a few seconds later. The voices had completely disappeared and no visions assailed him. Kalik rose gratefully, peering around as he tried to regain his bearings. The dragon's gleaming eyes widened in shock. He was no longer near the region where he had left Alexstrasza. The trees around him were more sparsely spread, and a deep twisting canyon stretched for miles to the north. This nameless location was far from any civilized area, either Alliance or Horde. Very likely few knew it to any degree, but of those few, Kalik suspected that he knew this region most of all. Some force had transported Kalik far across Azeroth, and the blue dragon had to look no further than the accursed artifact, which suddenly lay only a few yards before him, once more ominously aglow. Yeah, I'm torn because we get to see these flashbacks, which I think are cool, but we keep going forward to what is clearly in the aftermath of Cataclysm, but probably before Mists of Pandaria, maybe. And there's just all these hints, things that I am curious to learn about, but they're also kind of spoilers. But either way, this is a good story so far. Got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I really appreciate everybody watching and listening, and I hope that you enjoyed it. See you next time on Lore of Warcraft.